Sorry about that. Great. No, good. Thank you. Great job. As I say, it's now my pleasure to introduce Harry Raduege, General Harry Raduege of Deloitte and the Cohen Group. Harry is a staunch and steadfast supporter of EWI's cyber program since its inception, and one of the few, I think, who have made it to all the summits. Is that right? There you go. He's a pioneer. Harry, thanks so much.
Bruce, and it has been my distinct pleasure to have been involved with all 6 of the cybersecurity summits that we have put together over these years. It now is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce my good friend, Admiral Bill Owens. And he has had a remarkable life that has included several significant and successful careers, both on the government side and on the side of industry. He's been a high achiever from the early days, having been a U.S. Naval Academy graduate, having achieved a bachelor's degree in mathematics, then on to a Rhodes Scholarship, where he earned bachelor's and master's degrees in politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford University, graduating also with honors. Later, he earned a master's degree in management at George Washington University, again, graduating with honors. High achiever. Then in the United States Navy, he rose to the rank of 4-star admiral, serving last as the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the second highest ranking military officer in the United States. And there his responsibilities included reorganizing and restructuring the U.S. Armed Forces in the post-Cold War era. And prior to that, he served as commander of the U.S. Sixth Fleet from 1990 to 1992, which included service in Operation Desert Storm. During his military career, he spent a total of, and think of this, 4,000 days, more than 10 years, aboard submarines, including duty in Vietnam. He retired from the United States military in 1996. Now, today, Admiral Owens is the chairman of the CenturyLink Telecommunications, which is the 3rd largest U.S. telecom company, and he serves on the board of WIPRO and our own EastWest Institute. He also is executive chairman of Red Bison Advisory Group, which is a company that identifies opportunities with proven enterprises in China and the U.S. and creates dynamic partnerships. Recently, he was chairman of the AEA Investors Asia, a global private equity firm that's located in Hong Kong, and vice chairman of the New York Stock Exchange for Asia. He has served on over 20 large public boards, including Daimler, British American Tobacco, Telstra, Nortel, and Polycom. In fact, he was CEO and vice chairman of Nortel Networks, having taken the helm of that organization following the disclosure of accounting issues in April of 2004. And under his leadership, Nortel was reestablished as a stable, ethical Fortune 500 company. He also was CEO and chairman of Teledesic, a Bill Gates and Craig McCall company that brought worldwide broadband through an extensive satellite network. And prior to that, he was the president and COO and vice chairman of Science Applications International Corporation, which we all know more well as SAIC. Over his career, Admiral Owens has received many awards, including the Légion d'Honneur by France, which is its highest award given to foreigners. His recognition is one of the 50 most powerful people in networking by Network World. He was recognized as one of the 100 best board members in the U.S. For 2011, and he received the Intrepid Salute Award in recognition of his business achievements and support of important philanthropic activities. Admiral Owens has other passions, including the fact that he's a Rough Rider of the state of North Dakota and he is active in philanthropy to foster Chinese-American relations, including dialogues between the most senior retired officers in the U.S. and Chinese militaries, and similar dialogues between very senior economists. So, this is a man who's been there, done that, and excelled in life. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium Admiral Bill Owens. You know, with that kind of background, I can't resist.
You'll excuse us.
Yes. You push the button. There it is. Fantastic.
Well, thank you very much, Harry. We decided we would take this photo with a Huawei phone that would be sure it would get wide distribution. And we know Huawei is in the audience here this morning. It's really great to be here. I am a proud member of the board of EWI. It's a great institution in many different ways, and I'm honored to be able to present for a few minutes to you this morning. I was thinking I must be really old to have such a long CV. That's the only excuse. But I have had a blessed life, and I've seen a number of different things, and I want to talk to you a little bit today as the chairman of CenturyLink. I brought to the table when I came to CenturyLink an awareness that the world was changing fast. When Harry and I were shipmates, I always call my Air Force friends shipmates, in the Pentagon, he and I worked together at a time of radical change in the U.S. military. You may remember that during those years, it was the last years of the Clinton administration, there was a thing around called the Revolution in Military Affairs, and America had designed its military around the basis that strength related to the number of ships and tanks and airplanes and troops that you had. And we started to believe, and I know Harry was there with me, that strength related not to that. It related to the amount of knowledge you had of a very large battlefield and the amount of knowledge you could prevent the enemy from having of that same battlefield. And if you had that kind of dominance, you won. Not quite so simple. You needed a few ships and tanks and airplanes, but you'd win. That was the revolution in military affairs. And I think that's the revolution we're seeing in the world we all live in today. At CenturyLink, we're a very old telecoms company. You knew us as CenturyTel or Quest or follow-on additions, the Sprint wireline business, et cetera. Today we are an assembly of all of those, as well as a big data center company, cloud computing company called Savvis, and several other acquisitions. And we are not unlike our friends at AT&T and Verizon in the way we've grown the company and the way we've morphed the company into something that most Americans don't know. We are no longer the wireline company to your home. That's only 40% of our business. The other 60% is serving enterprise around the world. So big data, fiber, data centers, cloud computing, that's the nature of today's AT&T, Verizon, and CenturyLink. And it's in that world that the boardrooms have evolved. And so if you looked at what we talked about 10 years ago in the boardroom of CenturyTel or our friends at AT&T and Verizon, we're talking about that wireline and how do we get that cable underneath your local street and the manhole covers and the challenges of unions. That's what we talked about. Today we talk about something very different. Remember, more than half of our business is in this world of IT and it's big data and it's cloud computing. and we always think about, at every board meeting, we think about cybersecurity. And I think often about, the tsunami in Japan, and the analogy of what happens when something catastrophic happens to one company. In that case, it was a tsunami, it was a nuclear power plant, but they became responsible for what happened in all of Japan at that time. So as a company, we look at this in terms of what happens when something big and cataclysmic happens to you, our multinational business, when you're doing business on our network, in our data centers, with the big data, the lack of security, or the presence of security, and how do we as a company address that issue? And it's a big discussion, and I don't think that any of us see a profound solution to that challenge. It's just not apparent to us that there is a simple solution. And what I think is even more apparent to some of us is that the rate of change is accelerating. And so some of you have followed the discussion of singularity in the world. And that moment of singularity when the machine becomes as smart as you are, when it's able to reinvent itself, to become a new entity because it did it itself with no help from us. And so guys like Ray Kurzweiler out at Singularity University in Los Angeles have talked about this a lot. And the rate of change as we get to that stage is accelerating. And we're not doing very well now in addressing the issues they are now. And I thought these have been great panels, great discussions. But if we think it's bad now, wait till you see it next year, or the following year, or when we get to singularity in, I don't know, what's your guess? My guess is 2030. When the machine is smarter than, I hesitate to say all of you in the room, but most of you in the room. And what's that like? And what's the cybersecurity that is involved with that new world? And so how do we address not what our boardroom was like 10 years ago, or what is our boardroom like now, but what's it going to be in 5 years? And how big are those challenges going to be? And how are we going to address this new world that demands that industry gets involved to handle its own problems? So I salute EWI for bringing us all together to think about these things. CenturyLink is a proud sponsor, and several other large telecoms companies have been very involved with EWI to help to find solutions to these challenges. I suggest to you a solution. It's not a solution, it's an idea that warrants some attention, and I would ask all of you to give some thought to it and give EWI, and if you wish me, any input on this. And that is that we have had some experience with this in the United States in other industries. Harry mentioned that I was a nuclear submariner. I spent many years of my life underwater. My wife says this is why he is the way he is today. And in the nuclear industry, which has come in large part out of the American nuclear Navy, the nuclear industry has faced some of the same challenges. There is an analogy. It started 40 years ago with Admiral Rickover and the first nuclear power plant in the United States at Shippingport in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But the issue then, as we built dozens of nuclear power plants in this country, was how do we provide security and safety for those nuclear power plants? And of course, our friends in government wanted to help us. And they wanted to help a lot, and each branch of government had their own solutions. And it was very complex, and regulation got out of hand, and eventually the big nuclear power operators in our country established an organization that they funded called the Institute of Nuclear Power Operators. It's located in Atlanta, Georgia. Take a look at their website. Look at their mission. Their mission is that these industries, these companies who formed INPO, I-N-P-O, decided that they would regulate themselves, that they would try to establish standards, they'd try to do some inspections of each other, and they would be subject to rules that they themselves agreed to, and they funded INPO to do these kinds of evaluations. That has been an enormous success. The United States government said in the Department of Energy, we like this idea a lot. We realize, the United States government, we realize that we can't inspect all these power plants and make sure that American nuclear power is safe. By the way, that started right around the time of 3 Mile Island. And so this was a bit of self-protection by American industry. And I suggest to you that there's a great analogy of this with what we could do in our industry with the big telcos, the big network operators, maybe companies like Google that are talking a lot about Google Fiber and networks, big data center companies, Microsoft, to say who are the 8 or 10 of the most important of these in the United States and maybe in the world. So you start to think of Telefonica and Vodafone, et cetera, in Europe, and ask if we couldn't get the beginnings of an idea to bring these people together to establish a discussion on what would we do to try to regulate ourselves. It could be something that EWI could help to facilitate, and it could be something by which the governments of all of our countries could say, we'd be very interested in supporting this initiative. Because I don't think the government is going to move fast enough. I don't think when, and I see my time is out here and I'll conclude, but when somebody attacks CenturyLink and it comes from somewhere, the United States or somewhere else, and I think the way I'm supposed to react to this is to call a local sheriff or a policeman and complain about this. I don't think that's going to do it. If we see our system go down and we see power plants go down that are depending on our internet, or we see banks start to fail because of us at CenturyLink, I don't think that's going to work. And so we need to find ways that are helpful to government, every government, to find this solution. And I suggest that that be something that you all talk about and think about. So with that, I would conclude my comments. Harry and I are going to go off on the side and take more selfies. And if any of you want copies of those, we're glad to provide them. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Admiral. And maybe we have time for one question or so. So anybody who wants to step to the microphone. But let me just take this opportunity because one of our breakthrough groups is talking about the value of stories in remembering key aspects of perhaps application to cyber. And Admiral, you've been on 20 plus boards. I think that's very unique. So I can't resist asking one question at least. As a board member, in many cases chairman of those boards, can you remember one incident over that period of time that you've been in industry and on boards, one incident that perhaps defined the change in the board that would start the discussion and questioning on cyber?
Well, you know, many of the boards we are all familiar with nowadays are talking about this a lot. And so we are confronted by many individual issues. So I'll name 2 or 3. And then one has to think about what the next one is. What is that next one in 5 years from now that is even more significant? But the ones that I think have gotten people's attention are those that are the most sophisticated or those that are the most wide-ranging. And so, as many of you know, the Securities and Exchange Commission has new regulations on cyber. I'm sure Harry can talk more articulately than I can about this, but that certainly gets everybody's attention. If you're on the audit committee and you want to be responsible, and the SEC starts talking about cyber protection, that gets everybody's attention. It's a matter of good governance. It's a matter of understanding more, and so that's certainly been one of the things. I think the more profound technical viruses that we've seen, Stuxnet certainly got everybody's attention as soon as we all understood what it was, and the degree of sophistication that would be necessary to do that gets everybody's attention. And then, to whatever extent our advisors are telling us about how many hundreds of millions of dollars are lost by Bank A or B or C, especially if Bank A is a CenturyLink primary customer, gets your attention real fast, because the question then comes, are we liable? And liability is a big part of all of this for our businesses, something that the government is not going to address for us. But just like what was the Japanese company Tesco that ran that power plant in Japan, those power plants in Japan, all of us think about what is the liability if this happens on our network to one of our primary customers. And so that's a panorama of a few things, Harry.
Thank you, Admiral, and especially for those inside board insights that many of us might not have the opportunity of knowing firsthand. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Admiral Owens for his time here with us today and his wonderful comments.